The scars ran from his right temple down past his jaw, like claw marks frozen in skin. Silas Cade stood at the edge of the general store boardwalk with his arms crossed, watching the heavy-set woman unload flour sacks from the back of a wagon nobody in Copper Falls recognized. She moved like someone who had learned long ago that waiting for help meant going without. 3 sacks already stacked beside the store entrance. She reached for the 4th, and her boots slipped on the wagon bed. She caught herself against the sideboard, steadied, kept moving. The men leaning against the saloon across the street watched her the way they watched everything unfamiliar that came through town, with silence that felt like judgment and stares that lasted 3 seconds too long. There are stories that travel farther than the people who live them. If you want to know how far this one goes, drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how many places need to hear what happened next in that Montana town in the winter of 1884. Subscribe if you believe some people are worth fighting for long before the world sees it. Because what happened when Silas Cade finally spoke after 7 years of silence changed more than one life that day. Mara Brennan had buried her husband in Ohio 3 months before the bank took the house. She had sewn curtains for that house. She had planted rosemary by the back step and trained it to grow along the kitchen window so the whole room smelled like summer even in January. The bank did not care about rosemary. They gave her 4 days. She sold what she could carry and bought a train ticket to the one place her husband's cousin had mentioned in a letter 2 years prior, a town in Montana Territory that needed a cook for the logging camp kitchen. The cousin was dead by the time she arrived. Caught between a falling pine and bad timing. The logging company had hired someone else, a woman from Bozeman, thinner, younger. The foreman did not say those words, but Mara heard them anyway, in the gap between his glance at her body and his glance away. She had been in Copper Falls for 11 days. She had slept in a boarding house that charged by the night and served breakfast thin enough to see the plate through the gravy. She had asked at the hotel, the restaurant, the schoolhouse, the church. She had walked every street until her boots split at the seams, and she repaired them herself with thread she bought on credit she did not have. On the 12th day, the general store owner, a man named Polk with kind eyes and a wife who had died the previous spring, told her he could not hire her, but he could let her unload his freight wagons in exchange for goods. Not money, goods. She took the offer. Flour, beans, salt pork, enough to keep her alive while she kept looking. Silas Cade had not spoken in 7 years. Everyone in Copper Falls knew the story, or thought they did. A fire up in the high timber. His wife and his daughter, Pearl, 5 years old, blonde hair that caught the light like creek water over stones. Gone in one night. He had run into the burning cabin and come out alone. The scars were from the fire. The silence was from whatever he had seen inside it. He lived in a stone house 2 miles north of town that he had built with his own hands after the fire, and he came into Copper Falls once a month for supplies. He did not speak to anyone. He did not acknowledge greetings. He moved through the town like a man underwater, functional but unreachable. The children called him the ghost man. The adults called him nothing to his face. He watched Mara unload the 5th flour sack, then the 6th. The men across the street were still watching too, and one of them, a ranch hand named Dillard with a reputation for cruelty disguised as humor, pushed off the saloon post and started across the street. His boots made hollow sounds on the frozen dirt. He stopped 3 feet from the wagon. Mara did not look up. She reached for the 7th sack. "You charge by the pound, sweetheart?" Dillard's voice carried. 2 other men laughed from the saloon porch. Mara kept moving. She lifted the sack and turned toward the store. Dillard stepped into her path. Not touching her, just standing there, close enough that she had to stop or walk into him. "I asked you a question." She met his eyes for 1 second. Then she stepped around him. He moved again, blocked her again. The flour sack was heavy. Her arms were shaking. "You deaf or just rude?" That was when Silas Cade moved. He came off the boardwalk without sound and crossed the space between them in 4 strides. He did not touch Dillard. He simply stepped between the man and Mara and stood there, close enough that Dillard had to tilt his head back to keep eye contact. Silas was taller, broader. The scars down the side of his face caught the winter light. Dillard grinned, but it did not reach his eyes. "Well, hell, the ghost speaks." Silas did not speak. He stood there, waiting. Dillard looked past him at Mara, looked back at Silas. The grin faded. He stepped back once, then again. He turned and walked back to the saloon without another word. The men on the porch went quiet. Mara stood there with the flour sack in her arms, staring at the scarred man who had not said a word and did not look at her now. He turned and walked back toward the boardwalk. She watched him go. Then she carried the flour inside. She finished unloading the wagon as the sun dropped behind the mountains. Polk came out and handed her a burlap sack, 2 pounds of cornmeal, a small tin of lard, 6 eggs wrapped in newspaper, a chunk of salt pork the size of her palm. She thanked him. He nodded and went back inside. She stood there in the cold with the sack in her arms and no place to cook any of it. The boarding house did not allow cooking in the rooms. She had asked. The next morning, she walked to the church and asked the pastor's wife if she could use the kitchen in exchange for cleaning it. The woman looked at Mara the way the logging foreman had looked at her, a long glance that measured and dismissed in the same moment. "We have someone," the woman said. She did not say who. Mara walked back through town. The saloon, the feed store, the blacksmith. By noon, she was standing outside the last building on the north edge of town, a small house with a sign that read, "Doctor." She knocked. A man in his 60s with white hair and spectacles opened the door. His name was Gaines. He looked tired in the way of men who had seen too much and slept too little. "I can clean," Mara said. "I can cook. I can do laundry or mending or anything you need that does not require someone younger or thinner or prettier." Dr. Gaines blinked. Then he smiled, a small, surprised smile. "You were the first person in 20 years to tell me the truth before I asked for it. Come in." He hired her for 3 days a week. Cleaning the office, washing lemons, preparing simple meals he could eat between patients. It was not enough to live on, but it was enough to keep her in the boarding house another 2 weeks while she kept looking. On the 5th day of working for Dr. Gaines, she was boiling linens in the back room when she heard the front door open. She heard Gaines greet someone. She heard nothing in return. She kept working. 10 minutes later, Gaines appeared in the doorway. "Mara, I need you to bring the burn salve from the cabinet. The tin with the blue label." She found it and brought it to the front room. Silas Cade sat on the examination table with his shirt off. A fresh burn ran across his left shoulder, red and blistered, the kind that came from touching hot metal without thinking. Gaines was preparing a bandage. Silas did not look at her. She set the tin on the table beside Gaines and turned to leave. "Stay," Gaines said. "I will need another set of hands." She stayed. Gaines applied the salve. Silas did not flinch. His body was a map of old scars, burns, cuts, the kind of damage that came from years of work in unforgiving country. The new burn looked small by comparison. Gaines gestured for Mara to hold the bandage in place while he wrapped it. Her hands were steady. Silas still did not look at her. When Gaines finished, Silas pulled his shirt back on, left 3 coins on the table, and walked out without a word. "He has not spoken since the fire," Gaines said quietly, watching the door close. "But he listens, and he sees more than people think." Winter deepened. Mara kept working. She found 2 more jobs, mending clothes for the seamstress who had more orders than time, and baking bread twice a week for the hotel restaurant. The hotel owner was a woman named Constance with silver hair and a voice like gravel. She did not care what Mara looked like. She cared that the bread rose properly and arrived on time. Mara's bread did both. She began to see Silas more often, not speaking, just there, standing outside the general store when she unloaded wagons, sitting in the back of the church during Sunday service 3 pews behind where she sat, walking past the hotel on the mornings she delivered bread. He never acknowledged her, but he was there. On a Tuesday in late January, she was walking back to the boarding house after dark. The street was empty. The cold was the kind that turned breath into clouds and made the snow crunch like glass underfoot. She heard boots behind her. She did not turn around. The boots got closer. A hand grabbed her arm and spun her around. Dillard, drunk, grinning. "Been waiting to finish our conversation." She pulled her arm back. He held on, His other hand reached for her waist. She shoved him. He laughed. Then he was not laughing. He was on the ground. Silas Cade stood over him with one hand still clenched in a fist. He had come out of the dark without sound. Dillard scrambled back, slipping on the ice, and then he was running. Silas watched him go. Then he turned and looked at Mara. She looked back. He did not speak, but he walked her to the boarding house, stayed on the street until she was inside. She watched from the window as he walked away. 3 days later, she was in the general store when Polk mentioned that Silas had a standing order for bread every week, but the woman who baked it had moved to Bozeman. "He pays in advance," Polk said. "Never misses. But I do not have anyone to send it to him now."
"I will do it,"
Mara said. Polk looked at her. "You know where he lives?"
"I will find it."
The stone house was exactly 2 miles north, on a road that climbed into the pines. She walked it on a Saturday morning with a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth and a jar of blackberry preserves she had made from berries Constance had given her in trade. The house was small, neat. Smoke rose from the chimney. She knocked. Silas opened the door. He looked at the bread, looked at her, stepped aside. She went in. The house was one room with a sleeping loft, a stone fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, everything clean, everything in its place. The kind of order that came from a man who had lost control of the things that mattered and controlled everything else to survive it. She set the bread and the preserves on the table. "Polk said you needed a baker." He nodded. "I can bring bread every Saturday. You pay Polk, he pays me. You do not have to see me if you prefer." He shook his head, once, definite. She waited. He walked to the fireplace and picked up something from the mantel, a small wooden carving, a horse, rough but recognizable. He held it out to her. She took it. "You made this." He nodded. "It is beautiful." He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes were gray, tired, but not empty. She came back the next Saturday, and the next. Every time she brought bread. Sometimes she brought other things, a jar of soup, a shirt she had mended that Polk said belonged to him, wildflowers in the spring when the snow finally melted. He never spoke, but he started carving her small things, a bird, a star, a flower. He left them on the table for her to find. In April, Dr. Gaines asked her to assist with a difficult birth, a woman in the camps, breech baby. Gaines needed someone with steady hands and a strong stomach. Mara had both. They worked for 14 hours. The baby lived. The mother lived. Gaines paid her double and told her she had the hands of a born midwife. Word spread. Women started asking for her when their time came. Not instead of Gaines, with him. She learned fast. She kept 3 women alive that spring who would have died without her. By summer, she had moved out of the boarding house and into a small cabin behind the church that the pastor's wife, grudgingly, agreed to rent her. She had enough work to live on. She had a place. She had her name spoken in town without pity attached to it. But every Saturday, she still walked 2 miles north. In late June, a man came to Copper Falls. His name was Royce. He wore a suit too fine for Montana and boots too clean for a man who claimed to work in timber. He spent 3 days in the saloon buying drinks and asking questions. On the 4th day, he knocked on the door of Silas Cade's stone house. Mara was there. She was kneading dough at Silas's table. He had started letting her use his kitchen on Saturdays because it was bigger than hers, and she heard the knock. Silas opened the door. Royce stood there smiling. "Silas Cade, been a long time." Silas said nothing. Royce's smile thinned. "I came about the land. Your brother sold me his share before he died. That means I own half this property. I am here to buy you out." Silas shut the door in his face. Royce knocked again, harder. "I am not leaving until we talk." Mara set down the dough and walked to the door. She opened it. Royce looked her up and down with a smile that made her want to wash. "And who are you?" "Someone telling you to leave." "This does not concern you, sweetheart." Silas stepped in front of her. He still did not speak, but his hand moved to the axe leaning beside the door. Royce stepped back. "This is not over." He walked back down the road. Gaines found the deed records. Royce was telling the truth. Silas's younger brother had owned half the land. He had died 2 years ago in a logging accident, and according to territorial law, his share had gone to his creditors. Royce had bought the debt. He had a legal claim. He cannot force you to sell, Gaines said, but he can make your life difficult, and he will. He did. Royce filed a complaint with the Territorial Land Office, claiming Silas was preventing him from accessing his portion of the property. He hired men to survey the land and mark boundaries that cut through the middle of Silas's house. He showed up every few days with new documents and new threats, always smiling, always polite, always standing just close enough to be a warning. On a Sunday in July, Royce came to church. He sat in the front pew. When the service ended, he stood on the church steps and made an announcement. "I know most of you do not know me. I am Royce Hadley. I own land north of town, and I am looking to settle here permanent. I am a fair man. I am willing to pay Silas Cade a generous price for his portion, so we can both move forward. But he refuses to speak to me, refuses to negotiate. I am asking this community, as Christian people, to encourage him to do the right thing." The crowd murmured. People looked at each other. Mara stood at the back. Silas was not there. He never came to church anymore. Royce continued. "I have also heard that Mr. Cade has a woman living with him now. Unmarried. I do not judge. But I think the people of this town have a right to know what kind of man they are defending." Mara felt the eyes turn toward her. She kept her face still. She walked down the steps and straight past Royce without a word. She heard the whispers start before she reached the street. That afternoon, Constance came to Mara's cabin. "Do not listen to him. Everyone knows you are not living there. You are baking bread, that is all." But the damage was done. 2 of the women who had asked Mara to attend their births sent word they had changed their minds. The seamstress stopped giving her mending work. Polk still let her unload wagons, but he did not meet her eyes anymore. On a Friday, Mara walked to Silas's house and found Royce's men putting up a fence that ran through the middle of Silas's front yard. Silas stood on the porch with his arms crossed, watching. She climbed the steps and stood beside him. "You need to fight this," she said. He looked at her, shook his head. "Why not?" He walked inside. She followed. He went to the mantel and picked up a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside was a piece of paper, burned at the edges, the ink faded but still readable. A deed. The original deed to the land. It showed 2 names, Silas Cade and Benjamin Cade, brothers, equal ownership. But at the bottom, in different ink, was a signature, Benjamin's signature, and a date from 8 years ago, before the fire. A quitclaim. Benjamin had signed his half over to Silas. The deed had been in the cabin the night it burned. Silas had saved it, barely. "You have proof," Mara said. "This deed shows you own it all." He shook his head again. He pointed to the burned edges, then to the faded ink. Then he made a gesture, a shrug that said clearer than words, "Who will believe me?" She understood. A mute man with a burned piece of paper against a lawyer from the territorial capital with clean documents and a smile. It was not a fair fight. "Then we make them believe you," she said. On Saturday, Mara did not go to Silas's house. She went to the saloon. She walked in at noon when it was full of men from the ranches and the camps. The room went quiet. She walked to the bar. "I need to speak," she said. The bartender stared at her. "Lady, you cannot be in here." "I am speaking anyway." She turned to face the room. "Most of you know me. Some of you have daughters or wives I helped bring into this world. Some of you eat the bread I bake. Some of you think you know what kind of woman I am because a man in a clean suit told you so." She paused. "Royce Hadley is a liar. Silas Cade owns that land. All of it, and I can prove it." She held up the burned deed. "This is the original, signed 8 years ago, before the fire. Silas saved it, barely. It proves his brother gave up his claim. Royce knows this. That is why he is trying to force Silas out before anyone asks to see the real records." A man in the back called out, "Why does Silas not say so himself?" "Because he cannot," Mara said. "He has not spoken in 7 years, but his silence does not make him a liar, and my weight does not make me a whore. Some of you are going to believe Royce because he looks like someone you should believe, but you would be wrong. And when he takes that land and cuts every tree and sells it to the railroad, you will remember that you let him do it because you decided silence and scars and a woman's body were enough to ignore the truth." She set the deed on the bar. "Dr. Gaines has the territorial records. He can verify this, if you care." She walked out. The room stayed quiet. 2 days later, Gaines and the mayor went to the territorial land office. They came back with confirmation. The quitclaim was real. Royce's deed was valid only up to the point where Benjamin had signed his share away. Royce had no claim. The sheriff told him to leave town. Royce left. But before he did, he stopped outside the general store where Mara was unloading a wagon. He smiled at her. "You think you won something," he said. "But this town will never see you the way you want them to." She looked at him. "I do not care how they see me. I care that they see the truth." He left. She kept working. That Sunday, Silas Cade came to church. He sat in the back. When the service ended, people stood. He stood. He walked down the aisle to where Mara sat. Everyone watched. He looked at her. Then he turned to face the room. He opened his mouth. The scars pulled tight on his jaw. His voice came out rough, like something broken being forced back into use. "No one touches her." 4 words. The first words he had spoken in 7 years. The room went silent. He looked at Mara again. He held out his hand. She took it. They walked out of the church together. People stared. Let them stare. 3 months later, they were married in that same church. Dr. Gaines stood as witness. Constance baked the cake. Polk played fiddle. It was small. It was quiet. It was theirs. Silas never became a man of many words, but he did not need to be. He carved her a cradle that winter, a rocking chair the next spring, a hope chest the year after that. They filled the stone house with the things that mattered: bread, firelight, silence that felt like peace instead of absence. Mara kept working. She delivered 17 babies in the next 5 years. She buried 3. She saved 14. The women called her when their time came. They trusted her hands. And when people asked her, years later, when the story had smoothed into legend, what she thought when Silas finally spoke, she always gave the same answer. "I thought, he has been speaking all along. I just learned how to listen." Some people are born loud. Some people earn their voice by losing it and choosing when to use it again. Silas Cade chose. And the town that had watched him in silence for 7 years finally heard him. Not because he had something to prove, but because she was worth protecting. And some things are worth breaking silence for.